My name is Marissa, and at 28 years old, I discovered that being the responsible child doesn't guarantee fair treatment from your own parents. When my grandmother passed away and left her entire estate to me, I thought it was finally recognition for years of caring for her while everyone else stayed away. But 3 months later, I found out my parents had quietly transferred every single asset to my sister, Rebecca, instead. Their reasoning? She needed it more because she had children to support. When I confronted them, my father looked me straight in the eye and said, "Family takes care of family, Marissa. Stop being selfish." That was the moment I realized I had two choices: accept being walked over forever, or fight back in court. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if this is your first time here. Growing up as the eldest child in the Harrison family should have come with certain advantages, but in our household, responsibility seemed to be my burden, while privilege belonged to my younger sister. From the time I could walk, I was expected to set the example, help with household tasks, and look after Rebecca when our parents were busy with work. My father, David, ran a small accounting firm, while my mother, Carol, worked as a nurse at the local hospital, both demanding careers that left little time for hands-on parenting, which meant I often filled that gap. Rebecca, when 3 years younger, learned early that tears and tantrums got her what she wanted, while my steady reliability was simply expected. When she struggled with math in middle school, I was the one tutoring her every evening after finishing my own homework. When she wanted expensive dance lessons, our parents found the money, but when I asked for art supplies for my advanced placement classes, I was told to be more practical with my interests. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Rebecca's needs were urgent and important, while mine could wait. By high school, the dynamic had crystallized into something I couldn't ignore. Rebecca's poor grades were met with understanding and extra support, while my straight A's earned a brief nod of acknowledgement before the conversation shifted to whatever crisis she was facing that week. When college application time arrived, our parents hired a private counselor for Rebecca, while I navigated the process alone, researching schools and scholarships during late nights after work. I had started working at 15, not because we needed the money, but because I wanted independence. What began as weekend shifts at a local grocery store evolved into steady employment that taught me the value of earning my own way. By senior year, I had saved enough to cover most of my college expenses, which was fortunate since Rebecca's ongoing struggles with academics meant most of the family's education budget was directed toward tutoring and test prep services for her. The person who truly saw me during those formative years was my grandmother, Eleanor Harrison. Grandma Ellie lived just 20 minutes away in a charming Victorian house that had been in our family for generations. While my parents were consumed with work and Rebecca demanded constant attention, Grandma Ellie welcomed my weekend visits with genuine enthusiasm. Her kitchen always smelled of fresh bread, and her living room was filled with books that sparked conversations about everything from history to philosophy. "Marissa," she would say, settling into her favorite armchair with a cup of tea, "tell me what you're really thinking about these days." Those conversations became the foundation of our relationship. She listened without judgment, offered wisdom without condescension, and saw potential in me that others seemed to overlook. When I expressed interest in studying business and finance, she shared stories of her late husband's entrepreneurial ventures. When I worried about college costs, she quietly helped me research additional scholarship opportunities. As I grew older, our bond deepened beyond casual visits. During my college years, I made a point of calling her twice a week and visiting whenever I came home for breaks. She attended my graduation when my parents had to miss it due to one of Rebecca's recurring personal crises. She celebrated my first job offer, my promotions, and my decision to pursue an MBA part-time while working full-time. Meanwhile, Rebecca's relationship with Grandma Ellie remained superficial. She would visit occasionally, usually when she needed something or when our parents pressured her to make an appearance. Her conversations with our grandmother were brief and self-focused, often centered on whatever drama was currently consuming her life. Rebecca had married young to escape what she called the suffocating expectations of our family, though those expectations had always seemed far lighter for her than they were for me. By the time Rebecca had 2 children and was struggling through a difficult divorce, her visits to Grandma Ellie became even more sporadic. She was too busy, too stressed, too overwhelmed to maintain regular contact with our grandmother. I understood that single motherhood was challenging, but I couldn't understand why that meant abandoning the woman who had always been there for our family. As Grandma Ellie entered her 80s, I noticed subtle changes during our visits. She moved a bit slower, sometimes forgot small details, and began talking more frequently about practical matters like her will and estate planning. When she mentioned wanting to update her legal documents, I offered to help her find a good attorney, though she assured me she already had everything handled through the family lawyer who had served our family for decades. The conversations about her estate were matter-of-fact rather than emotional. She explained that she wanted to ensure her assets went to someone who would appreciate their history and handle them responsibly. The Victorian house held generations of memories. Her investment portfolio represented decades of careful financial planning, and her personal possessions carried sentimental value that required someone who understood their significance. "I've been thinking about this for years, Marissa," she told me during one of our Sunday afternoon visits. "It's important to me that everything goes to someone who will honor what these things represent, not just their monetary value." I assured her that whatever decisions she made would be the right ones, never imagining that I would be the primary beneficiary of her thoughtfulness. When Grandma Ellie passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 84, the grief hit me harder than I had expected. Beyond losing someone I loved deeply, I felt like I was losing the one person in my family who had consistently valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide for others. Her funeral was well attended, with neighbors and friends sharing stories of her kindness and community involvement. Rebecca attended with her children, visibly emotional but still somehow distant from the proceedings. The reading of the will took place a week later in the office of James Morton, the family attorney who had handled Grandma Ellie's affairs for over 30 years. I expected some small remembrance, perhaps a few $1,000s or a piece of jewelry with sentimental value. What I didn't expect was to hear my name attached to virtually every significant asset in her estate. The Victorian house, valued at approximately $400,000, was mine. The investment portfolio, worth nearly $600,000, was mine. Her personal possessions, including antique furniture, jewelry, and artwork, were all designated for me. The total value of the inheritance exceeded $1 million, a sum that represented not just financial security, but validation of the relationship we had built over decades. My parents seemed surprised, but not necessarily upset by the terms of the will. Rebecca appeared shocked, but offered what seemed like genuine congratulations, saying she was happy that Grandma Ellie had recognized how much I had meant to her. For a brief moment, I felt like my family was finally seeing me clearly, understanding that my years of dedication and responsibility had been noticed and valued by the person whose opinion mattered most to me. That feeling of validation and family harmony would last exactly 97 days. 3 months after Grandma Ellie's funeral, I was settling into the rhythm of managing my inheritance while maintaining my full-time career in financial consulting. The Victorian house had become my weekend retreat, a place where I could escape the demands of city life and feel connected to family history. I had started the process of updating the property while preserving its character, consulting with contractors about necessary repairs and improvements. The investment portfolio required more active management than I had initially anticipated. Grandma Ellie had been surprisingly sophisticated in her financial planning, with holdings spread across various sectors and asset classes. I spent evenings reviewing statements, researching market trends, and making strategic decisions about rebalancing the portfolio. It was work I genuinely enjoyed, combining my professional expertise with personal responsibility for preserving what she had built. My relationship with my parents had settled into a new normal following the inheritance. They seemed proud that I was handling everything responsibly, often asking for updates about the house renovations and investment performance during our weekly phone calls. Rebecca had been going through a particularly difficult period with her divorce proceedings, and I had even offered to help her find a good attorney, thinking that perhaps my improved financial situation could benefit the whole family. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in March when I received a call from my bank's investment services department. The representative, Sarah Chen, sounded confused as she explained the reason for her call. Several of the investment accounts associated with my grandmother's estate had been transferred to different ownership overnight, and she was calling to verify that I had authorized these transactions. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake," I told her, pulling up my online banking portal while we spoke. "I didn't authorize any transfers." "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Sarah's explanation sent ice through my veins. Using what appeared to be legitimate paperwork bearing my signature, someone had initiated the transfer of nearly the entire investment portfolio to accounts belonging to Rebecca Harrison Mitchell, my sister's married name. The transfers had been processed through a series of complex transactions designed to move the assets quickly and quietly. "The paperwork includes power of attorney documents and beneficiary change forms," Sarah continued. "But our fraud detection system flagged the transactions because of their size and timing. That's why I'm calling to verify your authorization." I stared at my computer screen in disbelief as the reality of the situation became clear. Someone had forged my signature and created fraudulent documents to steal my inheritance. The sophistication of the paperwork suggested this wasn't a random crime, but something planned and executed by someone with intimate knowledge of my financial situation and legal access to detailed information about the estate. After hanging up with Sarah, I immediately called James Morton. His secretary informed me that Mr. Morton was in meetings all day, but could see me first thing the following morning. The urgency in my voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because she offered to have him call me between appointments if it was truly an emergency. When Mr. Morton called back 2 hours later, his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Marissa, I think you need to sit down for this conversation," he began. "I've been dreading this phone call, but I suppose it was inevitable." He explained that 3 weeks earlier, my parents had visited his office with Rebecca in tow, presenting him with what they claimed was evidence of my grandmother's true final wishes. According to them, Grandma Ellie had expressed regret about leaving everything to me, worried that I was too young and inexperienced to handle such responsibility. They produced handwritten notes allegedly in her writing, suggesting she wanted the inheritance redistributed to ensure Rebecca's children were provided for. I told them repeatedly that the will was ironclad and legally binding, Mr. Morton continued, but your father became quite insistent, arguing that family obligations superseded legal technicalities. He claimed you would understand and agree to the redistribution once you learned about your grandmother's supposed change of heart. The attorney's voice grew more troubled as he continued his explanation. "When I refused to facilitate any changes to the will, your father implied that they had other legal options. I assumed he meant they might contest the will through proper channels, though I knew they had no grounds for such action. I never imagined they would resort to document forgery." Mr. Morton had discovered the fraudulent transfers when reviewing monthly estate reports. The sophisticated nature of the forged documents suggested professional assistance, though he couldn't speculate about who might have helped my family execute such a complex scheme. He had already contacted the appropriate authorities and was prepared to pursue full legal remedies, but wanted to inform me before taking any irreversible steps. The phone call with Mr. Morton left me reeling, but it was nothing compared to the conversation I knew I had to have with my parents. I drove to their house that evening, my mind cycling between disbelief and rage. How could the people who raised me, who taught me about honesty and integrity, commit such a blatant act of theft against their own daughter? My mother answered the door with a nervous smile as if she had been expecting my visit. Marissa, sweetheart, come in. Your father and I were just talking about you. I found my father in his home office, paperwork spread across his desk in what looked like an attempt to appear busy. When he looked up and saw my expression, his face immediately shifted from casual greeting to defensive preparation. We need to talk about Grandma Ellie's estate, I said, closing the office door behind me. Specifically about the fraudulent documents used to transfer my inheritance to Rebecca. My father's reaction confirmed everything I had feared. Instead of shock or confusion, his face showed resignation mixed with defiance. He had been caught, and he knew it, but he wasn't planning to apologize. "Sit down, Marissa," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "This conversation has been a long time coming." He launched into a prepared speech about family responsibilities and moral obligations that superseded legal documents. According to him, my grandmother had been manipulated in her final years, influenced by our close relationship to make decisions that weren't in the family's best interests. Rebecca needed the money more than I did, he argued. She had children to support, a difficult divorce to navigate, and no career prospects that would provide long-term security. "You're young and successful," he continued, his tone growing more confident as he warmed to his argument. "You'll have plenty of opportunities to build wealth throughout your career. Rebecca doesn't have those same advantages. This inheritance could change her children's lives, provide them with educational opportunities and financial security they wouldn't otherwise have." I listened to his entire justification before responding, trying to process how my own father could rationalize stealing from me while presenting himself as the moral authority in the situation. "Dad, you committed fraud," I said simply. "You forged my signature, created false documents, and stole money that legally belongs to me. How is that taking care of family?" His response revealed the depth of his twisted logic. In his mind, he hadn't committed a crime but had corrected an injustice. Grandma Ellie's decision to leave everything to me had been unfair to Rebecca, and as the family patriarch, he had the responsibility to ensure equitable treatment of his children. "Sometimes being a parent means making difficult decisions," he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. "You'll understand when you have children of your own." The conversation continued for over an hour, with my father alternately defending his actions and trying to guilt me into accepting the situation. He painted Rebecca as a victim of circumstances beyond her control while portraying me as selfish for wanting to keep an inheritance I didn't truly need. When I mentioned involving law enforcement, his demeanor shifted from paternal authority to barely contained anger. "You would really call the police on your own family?" he asked, his voice rising. "Over money? Is that the kind of person we raised you to be?" The irony of his question wasn't lost on me. He was asking whether I was the kind of person who would hold family members accountable for their crimes while simultaneously defending his decision to commit those crimes against me. That night, I called Rebecca directly, hoping to understand her role in the scheme and possibly find a path toward resolution that didn't involve destroying our family relationships entirely. Her response shocked me even more than my father's rationalization. "Marissa, I'm sorry you found out this way," she said, her voice carrying exhaustion rather than guilt. "But honestly, did you really think it was fair that you got everything while my kids got nothing? Grandma barely knew Emma and Tyler. She saw you every week, but couldn't be bothered to build relationships with her great-grandchildren." She continued explaining her perspective, revealing a deep resentment I hadn't fully understood before. According to Rebecca, I had always been the golden child who received unfair advantages, while she struggled with less support and lower expectations. The inheritance was simply the latest example of family favoritism that had shaped our entire lives. "You have a great career and no dependent," she argued. "I'm a single mother working retail while fighting for custody and child support. Those investment accounts could pay for my kids' college education and give them opportunities I never had. How is it selfish for me to want that for my children?" The conversation with Rebecca revealed that the theft wasn't just about money, but about decades of perceived inequality and resentment within our family. She genuinely believed that taking my inheritance was a form of justice, correcting what she saw as an unfair distribution of family resources that had favored me throughout our lives. As I hung up the phone that night, I realized that my choice was no longer simply about recovering stolen money. This was about fundamental questions of justice, family loyalty, and whether some relationships are worth preserving when they're built on exploitation and betrayal. The decision to pursue legal action wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The next morning, I called Mr. Morton and told him to proceed with filing criminal charges and civil lawsuits to recover my stolen inheritance. Whatever consequences followed, I refused to let my family's theft stand unchallenged. The legal battle that followed would test everything I believed about family, justice, and the price of standing up for what's right. The wheels of justice moved slowly, but they moved with purpose. Within 48 hours of my decision to pursue legal action, Mr. Morton had filed both criminal complaints and civil suits against my parents and Rebecca. The criminal charges included fraud, forgery, and identity theft, while the civil case sought full recovery of the stolen assets plus damages and legal fees. The first court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. During those weeks, I experienced something I had never felt before in relation to my family: complete silence. The phone calls stopped. The casual text messages disappeared. Even distant relatives who had maintained friendly relationships with me suddenly became unavailable. It was as if I had been excommunicated from the Harrison family for the crime of refusing to be robbed. My attorney, Patricia Wells, specialized in estate fraud and family financial crimes. She was recommended by Mr. Morton and came with an impressive track record of successful prosecutions in similar cases. During our first meeting, she reviewed the evidence with the methodical precision of someone who had seen this type of betrayal many times before. "The good news is that your case is exceptionally strong," Patricia explained, spreading documents across her conference table. "The forged signatures are obvious to any handwriting expert. The timing of the transfers creates a clear pattern of deception, and the sophisticated nature of the fraud suggests premeditation rather than an impulsive decision." She paused, studying my expression carefully. "The challenging news is that family fraud cases are emotionally devastating for everyone involved. Your parents and sister will likely mount a defense that portrays you as vindictive and greedy while painting themselves as victims of circumstances. Are you prepared for that level of character assassination?" I had been asking myself that same question since deciding to move forward with legal action. Was I prepared to have my own family testify in court about what a terrible person I was? Could I handle seeing Rebecca's children, my own niece and nephew, potentially caught in the middle of a public legal battle? "I'm prepared for whatever they throw at me," I told Patricia, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "What I'm not prepared for is letting them get away with stealing everything my grandmother worked her entire life to build." The discovery phase of the legal proceedings revealed details about the fraud that were even more disturbing than I had initially understood. Bank records showed that my parents had been planning this theft for months, opening new accounts and establishing financial relationships that would facilitate the rapid transfer of stolen assets. Phone records indicated dozens of calls between my father and financial professionals in the weeks leading up to the fraud, suggesting he had sought expert advice on how to execute the scheme. Most shocking was the revelation that Rebecca had been actively involved in the planning from the beginning. Text messages recovered from her phone showed detailed discussions with our parents about which assets to target first and how to minimize the chances of detection. Far from being a passive beneficiary of our parents' misguided attempt to help her, she had been a willing co-conspirator in the theft. One text message from Rebecca to our mother was particularly damning. "Marissa is so focused on her career that she probably won't notice the transfers for weeks. By then, we can have everything moved and claim it was Grandma's real wishes. She'll be mad, but she won't actually sue her own family. The arrogance of that assumption infuriated me more than the theft itself. They had counted on my loyalty and family bonds to protect them from consequences, believing I would ultimately choose peace over justice. They had calculated that my love for them would make me complicit in my own victimization. As the court date approached, the pressure from extended family members intensified. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had remained neutral began reaching out with increasingly desperate attempts to convince me to drop the charges. The family narrative had crystallized around the idea that I was tearing apart the Harrison family over money, choosing legal revenge over forgiveness and reconciliation. My Aunt Linda, my father's sister, called me on a Sunday evening with what she presented as a final plea for family unity. "Marissa, sweetheart, I understand you're hurt and angry," she began, her voice carrying the kind of gentle manipulation I remembered from childhood family gatherings. "But is this really worth destroying your relationship with your parents and sister forever? Money comes and goes, but family is irreplaceable." Her argument followed the same pattern I had been hearing for weeks. Minimize the crime, maximize the consequences of seeking justice, and frame my pursuit of legal remedies as the real problem facing our family. According to this logic, my parents' fraud was a mistake born of good intentions, while my refusal to accept being robbed was selfish vindictiveness. "Aunt Linda," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "If someone who wasn't related to me had forged my signature and stolen $1 million from me, what would you advise me to do? Would you tell me to just forgive them and move on because confrontation is uncomfortable?" Her silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When she finally responded, her voice had lost its gentle, persuasive tone. "That's different, Marissa. This is family." "No," I said firmly. "That's exactly the point. This is family, which makes what they did even worse, not better. They betrayed me specifically because they thought family loyalty would protect them from consequences." The conversation ended awkwardly, but it clarified something important for me. The family members pressuring me to drop the case weren't concerned about justice or fairness. They were concerned about their own comfort levels and the inconvenience of having to choose sides in a public legal battle. My pursuit of justice was making them uncomfortable, and they wanted me to sacrifice my rights to restore their peace of mind. 3 days before the first court hearing, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Rebecca stood in my hallway at 7 o'clock in the evening, looking exhausted and desperate in a way I had never seen before. Her usual confidence had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "I think we need to talk before this goes any further." I hesitated, knowing that any conversation with Rebecca could potentially be used against me in court. But curiosity about what she might say ultimately won out over caution. I led her into my living room, though I remained standing while she took a seat on my couch. "Marissa, I need you to understand something," she began, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. "When Mom and Dad first suggested this whole thing, I thought they were talking about asking you to voluntarily share some of the inheritance. I never intended for anyone to forge documents or commit fraud." Her version of events painted her as a reluctant participant who had been manipulated by our parents into accepting stolen money. According to Rebecca, she had only learned about the forged signatures after the transfers had already been completed, at which point she felt trapped between returning money her children desperately needed and exposing our parents to criminal charges. "I know how this looks," she continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "But I was trying to protect everyone. I thought if I could just pay you back gradually, over time, we could work this out privately, without involving lawyers and courts." I listened to her entire explanation before responding, though every word felt like another layer of manipulation designed to make me question my own judgment. Even now, facing criminal charges and potential prison time, Rebecca was trying to rewrite history to cast herself as a victim rather than a perpetrator. "Rebecca, I've seen the text messages," I said quietly. The ones where you and Mom planned which assets to target first and discussed how long it would take me to notice the theft. You weren't a reluctant participant. You were a co-conspirator from the beginning. Her face crumpled as she realized her attempt at deception had failed. For a moment, I saw something that might have been genuine remorse, though it was quickly replaced by renewed desperation. "Please, Marissa," she said, her voice breaking, "if I go to prison, what happens to Emma and Tyler? They've already lost their father through the divorce. Are you really going to take their mother away from them too? Over money that you don't even need?" The emotional manipulation was so transparent that it almost made me laugh. Throughout this entire ordeal, Rebecca had consistently framed the consequences of her choices as somehow being my fault. According to her logic, she wasn't facing prison because she had committed fraud, but because I was cruel enough to hold her accountable for committing fraud. "Rebecca," I said, moving toward my front door to signal that the conversation was ending. "You made choices that put your children at risk. I didn't make those choices for you. If you were concerned about the impact on Emma and Tyler, you should have considered that before participating in a scheme to steal from me." She left that evening without achieving whatever reconciliation or manipulation she had hoped for. But her visit had accomplished something she hadn't intended. It had strengthened my resolve to see the legal process through to its conclusion. If she was willing to lie to my face, even while facing criminal charges, then there was no possibility of rebuilding trust or finding a private resolution to this betrayal. The morning of the first court hearing arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I prepared to see my family in what would likely be an adversarial setting. I had chosen to wear a conservative navy suit that projected seriousness without appearing overly formal. Patricia had coached me on courtroom etiquette and what to expect from the proceedings, but no amount of preparation could fully ready me for the emotional reality of watching my parents and sister face criminal charges. The courthouse was busier than I had expected, with multiple cases being heard simultaneously throughout the building. Our hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock in courtroom 3B, and I arrived 30 minutes early to settle my nerves and review my notes one final time. Patricia met me in the hallway outside the courtroom, carrying 2 briefcases full of evidence and looking like someone who had done this many times before. "Remember," she said as we waited for the courtroom to open, "today is primarily procedural. The judge will review the charges, ensure everyone understands their rights, and set a schedule for future proceedings. Don't expect dramatic confessions or emotional breakdowns. This is just the beginning of what will likely be a lengthy process." When the courtroom doors opened, I was surprised to see how many people had come to observe the proceedings. Extended family members filled several rows, along with neighbors and community members who had apparently heard about the case through local gossip networks. The public nature of the hearing suddenly made everything feel more real and more humiliating for everyone involved. My parents entered the courtroom with their attorney, a local defense lawyer named Robert Chen, who specialized in white-collar crime cases. They looked older than I remembered, diminished somehow by the formal setting and the weight of the charges they were facing. My father's usual commanding presence had been replaced by something that looked almost like shame, while my mother appeared to be fighting back tears. Rebecca arrived separately, with her own attorney, a young woman who looked barely old enough to have graduated law school. The decision to secure separate legal representation suggested that the unified family front was beginning to crack under pressure, with each defendant now focused primarily on protecting their own interests. Looking back on that journey through the legal system, I never imagined that standing up for myself would cost me my entire family. The court ultimately ruled in my favor, ordering full restitution of the stolen inheritance plus damages and legal fees. My parents received suspended sentences with probation and community service, while Rebecca faced similar consequences. The money was returned, but the relationships were destroyed beyond repair. Was it worth it? That's the question I get asked most often, and honestly, it took me years to know the answer. What I learned is that some people will only respect your boundaries when there are real consequences for crossing them. My family had spent decades counting on my loyalty to protect them from accountability. And that pattern would have continued forever if I hadn't finally said enough. Today, I live peacefully in my grandmother's Victorian house, managing the investments she left me and building the life she always believed I deserved. The silence from my family still stings sometimes, but it's better than being treated as a doormat. If you're facing a similar situation where family members think they can exploit your love and loyalty, remember this: choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Sometimes, the people who claim to love you the most are the ones willing to hurt you the deepest. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to let them.